day to all of you, our fine teachers. It is professional development opportunity. Your work is so important to the future of your country because education is key. It is one of the foundations of society. And how well you educate children will have an impact on the future of this country. Australia has been involved with the education sector in the Philippines for several decades now because we want to see a strong, prosperous, educated Philippines. I am pleased that Australia supports DepEd on teacher professional development and curriculum. Through partners like assessment, curriculum and technology.
Good afternoon, teachers. Welcome to our third synchronous session. I am Lalaine Baggy, a research officer of the Assessment, Curriculum, and Technology Research Center, or ACT-RC. ACT-RC is a partnership between two universities, the University of the Philippines and the University of Melbourne. Right now, we are under the UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies in UP Diliman. I will be your host today together with Xerxes. Good afternoon, Xerxes.
Good afternoon, Lalaine, and to all of the teachers who are joining us via YouTube Live. I'm Xerxes De Castro, another research officer at ACT-RC. Our center is grateful and honored to be part of this initiative by the Sustaining Education Reform Gains, or SURGE project. Let's begin our third synchronous session on the Building Basic Assessment Competence of Teachers.
Thank you, Xerxes. Today we will be talking about the focus of Session 3, Evidence Collection. Our main agenda this afternoon is to provide you with a summary of the session, its highlights and important considerations, and try to process your reflections from the initial batch of responses that we have gathered. We will also present some more examples. We will have resource speakers to help us go through the highlights of Session 3 and address the questions raised from the reflections and from the YouTube comments. I'm sure we're all excited to listen to them. But before we get to business, let us first listen to a short message from the Australian Ambassador to the Philippines, His Excellency Stephen J. Robinson, AO.
G'day to all of you, our fine teachers. It is a privilege to speak to you today and commend you for being part of this online professional development opportunity. Your work is so important to the future of your country because education is key. It is one of the foundations of society. And how well you educate children will have an impact on the future of this country. Australia has been involved with the education sector in the Philippines for several decades now because we want to see a strong, prosperous, educated Philippines. I am pleased that Australia supports DepEd on teacher professional development and curriculum enhancement through partners like Assessment, Curriculum and Technology Research Centre, or ACT-RC, an organisation born from Filipino-Australian collaboration and shared expertise. I hope you find this training delivered by ACT-RC in collaboration with the Department of Education's National Educators Academy of the Philippines useful in further developing the reading, math and science literacy of your students. As you are aware, this training is part of a series of professional development activities on student learning assessments and emerging literacies. It is closely aligned with the focus of the Program for International Student Assessment, PISA, which the Philippines participated in for the first time in 2018. I am glad to note that this program aims to support you in responding to the evolving needs of your students for relevant and updated knowledge and skills, an area of particular interest to Australia. I would like to briefly acknowledge ACT-RC, specialists from the University of the Philippines and the University of Melbourne. Education remains a core priority for Australia's development cooperation with the Philippines. Our partnership in education has gone from strength to strength over the last 3 decades. Australia and the Philippines are also long-standing partners. Last year, in 2021, we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the diplomatic relationship between Australia and the Philippines. On a personal level, let me share with you that supporting teachers is something very close to my heart. I was a teacher myself, and so were several of the staff members at the embassy before we pursued careers in diplomacy. So, I am intimately familiar with some of the challenges of your work and the importance of what you do. The pandemic has made your jobs much more challenging, and we appreciate your continued perseverance, innovation, and resilience in facilitating learning for millions of Filipino children across different modalities. Our children's education right now is one of the most important investments we have for the future. Education is a fundamental aspect of development, both to an individual and to a society. Australia, as a reliable friend and a good neighbour to the Philippines, will support you in whatever way we can. In closing, I would like to leave you with a line from Joseph Joubert. To teach is to learn twice. I hope you will not get tired of teaching, because that also means you will continue to learn. So thank you for your love of learning. I wish you all the very best as you continue with your quest for education quality through these trainings. Congratulations to all of you. Mabuhay.
Thank you, Ambassador Robinson. At this point, we would like to request the participants to utilize the comment section only to raise questions regarding the presentation. While our resource speaker is delivering her presentation, feel free to type in your questions or comments in the comments box. They will all be answered later in the session.
Let's begin. To present to us the highlights of Session 3, we have with us our resource speaker for today, Dr. Marlene Ferido. Dr. Marlene Ferido is the Philippine Deputy Director of ACT-RC. Some of her involvements in the center include the research on the progress of students through the science curriculum, curriculum review of the Philippine K-12 curriculum, feasibility study on microcertification for the Alternative Learning System or ALS in the Philippines, and technical support in the review of DepEd's reports on international large-scale assessment such as PISA 2018 and TEAMS 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Marlene Ferido.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Session 3 of our Assessment Professional Development for Teachers. Let me share my screen for Session 3 as I share highlights on evidence collection. Okay. Just for a recap of the previous two sessions, in Session 1, we tackled assessment purposes, and this referred to formative assessment and summative assessment. And if you will recall, there were different purposes for formative assessment, whether done as a class or at the individual level. These are identifying the gap between the current and the desired learner competence, adapting for learner needs, providing feedback, improving instruction, and engaging students in the assessment and learning process. For summative assessment at the individual level, if you will recall, the purposes are for grading, ranking, reporting, promoting students, and certifying their accomplishments. In the previous Session 2 that you had last week, the focus was on assessment planning, and the session tackled factors to consider when planning assessment. These are curriculum standards, curriculum connections, progression of learning, which we will tackle in more detail today, timing, and context and resources. Also, last week, we considered what to assess, and these are curriculum standards, specifically the learning competencies, curriculum connections, and progression of learning and timing. And also, we tackled how to assess your students, and these are through selecting assessment methods, particularly considering the context and designing tasks. Today, we will answer 3 essential questions through the different slide presentations that I will share with you. First question is, how can a progression of learning help assessment design? Secondly, why is it important to consider a student zone of proximal development or ZPD when we assess learning? And thirdly, why is it beneficial to create task and write assessment items for different levels of student competence? So first, I'd like you to focus on this two different figures, which were already shown to you in previous sessions. In figure 1, for formative assessment, you will see that evidence collection is an important step in formative assessment. It's first and foremost in the teaching learning process. And the same is true for summative assessment, where you need to collect evidence of student outcomes and use it to interpret the evidence and use that for grading and reporting. So for today, let's recall what's written in Deped Order number 8, Series 2015, regarding the definition or the description of classroom assessment. It says there that it is an ongoing process of identifying, gathering, organizing, and interpreting quantitative and qualitative information about what learners know and can do. Now, for today, we will focus on gathering. That's why we collect evidence. In the succeeding sessions, we will learn more about interpreting and then also using assessment information. Now, what do we assess? Okay. First, we have to consider that assessment tasks should measure students' proficiency levels. What does this mean? This means how well students perform in your particular learning area. And this assessment task should be measured against the prescribed learning competencies in the curriculum guide. Secondly, we can collect data to determine whether our students have achieved the curricular expectations written in the curriculum guide. In addition, assessment can inform us about the learning gaps of our students and how we can use this information to help them achieve their learning goals. So you see the what encompasses the what to assess. Now, our first essential question is this: how can a progression of learning help assessment design? Right? So first, although you already had an overview of what progression of learning is in session 2, we will deal with it in more detail today. Now, the progression of learning refers to the sequence of topics and competencies. Now, where do you find that sequence? It's in the curriculum guide of your learning area. Secondly, progression of learning shows how a particular topic should develop from the simplest or most fundamental concept and understanding to the most complex one. That is why as teachers, even though you are only teaching, for example, a grade 2 classes or grade 3 classes, you have to look at the learning competencies and the standards in the previous grade level and in the immediate succeeding level, grade level, to help you see the development of concepts and skills. Now, progression of learning is also a useful tool to identify what knowledge and skills should be assessed. Okay, so that gives you the scope of your assessment. And progression of learning is aligned with the curriculum learning standards, or what you find as learning competencies, right? So you have a reference for the progression of learning. Now look at this staircase and see how a student can proceed to level 2. Now, of course, the best way to do it is first step on level 1 before proceeding to level 2. Now, the prerequisite knowledge and skills that need to be learned first are in level 1 in the progression of learning before the student can go to a more difficult one in level 2, then level 3 and 4. Of course, in real life, going through a staircase, it is more difficult to jump from the base to level 2 without going through the first step. Now, the progression of learning also tells you or indicates what concepts and skills to assess. And these are found in the curriculum guide. Okay. Now, in the diagram, you see that the concepts and skills covered in level 1 and in level 2 are prerequisite knowledge and skills needed for the student to be able to tackle the level 3 of the progression of learning. So your assessment task that you give will tell you or inform you where your students are in this progression. Okay. Now, prerequisite knowledge and skills should be learned and acquired before introducing a new concept or topic. That is very important because you can go on and on day after day teaching new concepts, but if this prerequisite knowledge and skills have not been fully understood or acquired by your students, then they will not be able to understand more complex ideas. So the prerequisite knowledge and skills, as in the staircase diagram, are the lower levels of the progression of learning. So you can avoid the difficulty of your students learning a new topic by making sure that they know and understand the prerequisite knowledge and skills. Now, here is an example of the staircase where you have concepts related to grade 2 mathematics. The topic is addition without regrouping. Okay, you can find that in your curriculum guide in math. Now, the diagram shows the different levels of proficiency of different students. Now, this is a hypothetical progression of learning, meaning the teacher made it based on what she got from the curriculum guide and not based on some empirical data. All right. Now, note that level 1, which is the lowest, which should be the prerequisite skill for the upper levels, indicates that the learner can recognize the value and place value of each digit in a 3-digit number, hundreds, tens, and thousands. So that is the lowest. The next level of proficiency, level 2, is that learner can understand the properties of addition. What are the properties of addition? Commutative, associative identity. And the learner should apply each of these properties in appropriate and relevant situations. I will give you an example of assessment task reflecting these different levels. Now, as you go higher, in level 3, the learner can add mentally 1-digit numbers to 2-digit numbers with sums up to 50 using appropriate strategies. Now, take note that for the learners at level 3, they will be able to perform that skill if they already know and understand levels 1 and 2. Now, the highest level here is level 4 for the grade 2 math students. The learner can add numbers with sums through 1,000 without regrouping. Now, this is the only time, level 4, that the learning competency written in your curriculum guide is achieved by the student. That is, he or she visualizes, represents, and adds numbers with sums through 1,000 without regrouping using appropriate strategies. Now, when you have the progression of learning, it is also good to use it in your teaching. So when you teach addition without regrouping, do not assume that all students in your class have already achieved level 1. You make sure that through formative assessment strategies, you will be able to determine whether they are in level 1 or at the higher levels. Okay. Now, here is another example of a progression of learning for grade 2, but now in English. All right. And the topic covered is responding to a text read. Now, the learning competency in the curriculum guide for grade 2 English says that the student should respond to the story by drawing from personal experiences and feelings. Now, it might look easy for you as teachers, but you have to go through different steps while teaching to be able to let your students go to the highest levels. Okay. And so in this progression, you will observe that at level 1, it is necessary as a prerequisite skill that students can note details of the story. Okay. Now, after noting the details of the story, a higher proficiency level is that they can verbalize. In other words, they can talk about the events before, during, and after reading the story. Okay? They should make a coherent rendition of the story orally. Now, in the higher level, level 3, assuming that they have already noted the important details of the story and verbalized the events before, during, and after reading the story, they should be able to infer character traits and emotions. Right? That's a higher proficiency level. And next higher one, level 4, the students should be able to see connections between personal experiences and experiences depicted in the text. All right? So, nag-a-apply na sila dyan. Nagko-connect na sila ng nabasa nila at saka yung personal experiences nila. And the highest level, level 5, is the learner should be able to apply ideas taken from literature, from the books they read, the stories they hear, to their own life experiences. And you'll note that at level 5, they are able to achieve the learning competency indicated in the curriculum. Response to the story by drawing from personal experiences and feelings. All right? So there is a gradual increase in skills in this case, reading skills. Okay, now let me go to an example in high school, grade 8 English. I'll just have to go a little bit faster. The learning competency is evaluate personal significance of a literary text, spider's thread. So, from noting details, para rin sa grade 2, and recalling prior knowledge, that's level 1, they go to infer details. So, similar also to grade 2. But then in level 3, they begin to analyze and identify the characters, experiences, and decisions, and use this to predict and make connections. So in high school, they are expected already to make connections. Then in level 4, the student should be able to react on, to reflect on, and evaluate the character's action based on what was previously known and what was learned from the text. And the highest level is that they will be able to reflect and evaluate the relevance of the themes and values of the text to their own lives. Okay, so there is a gradual development of skills as you go along the progression of learning. Now, so how do you assess such progression of learning? Well, you have to determine your purpose, whether it's a formative purpose or a summative purpose. Then you can use all these examples of assessment strategies: agree, disagree, games, interviews, checklists, KWL activities, practice exercises, observations, performing tasks, quizzes, recitation, simulation activities. You can choose any which are appropriate for a certain lesson. And then if your purpose is summative, then you have to expect a written work at the end of the topic or unit, or give performance tasks at the end of a lesson. Or if you have quarterly assessments, then that's also summative in purpose. Now, how do you assess all these competencies or proficiency levels, I mean? First, you have considered the context. If some of you are still doing some online activities, then ask yourself, will the assessment task be given during a synchronous session like what we're doing now, or asynchronous? Okay. Second, what materials are readily or easily available to your students? We have tackled this last session. Third, will the assessment be completed individually or by group? You have to decide on that beforehand. And based on previous assessments, what do your students know and can do? This you have to remember, because this is the basis of how you will go along your budget of work. Even though that's budgeted, you have to consider what they know and what they can do. All right. The second essential question. Now that you know how the progression of learning is constructed and how it is used, now the second essential question is, why is it important to consider a student's zone of proximal development, or ZPD, when assessing learning? Because you will ask yourself, in the assessment task that I will do, how do I know whether the level 1 students are able to tackle the task, or the level 5 students can so easily tackle the task? Okay, now let's begin with the description of zone of proximal development developed by Vygotsky. Now you see here two circles which are overlapping, and there's an arrow which depicts the learning of your student or the development of their acquisition of knowledge and skills. Now, the ZPD or the zone of proximal development is here in the overlap between what the students are currently capable of doing independently. That's actual development. So that's their current knowledge and skills. That's on the lighter blue circle. And what they can do with assistance or support their potential development from an adult or from more capable peers. Okay. Further, you have the zone of actual development or ZAD. So that is the zone that consists of competencies that are already learned or acquired by the student. In other words, alam na nila yung mga competencies. So at the ZAD, students can perform tasks without assistance or guidance. Contrary to the CPD, where the students need the support of an able person in terms of understanding concepts and skills. And the capable person can be the teacher, the parents, peers, and even reference materials. And towards beyond the ZPD are those competencies that the student cannot do. These are competencies beyond their reach. All right. Now, which zone should you assess? All right. Now, assessments should be designed to measure knowledge and skills at the ZPD. In other words, with assistance from a more capable person, the students can learn concepts and develop the skills at ZPD. They need guidance, supervision, and assistance. And this is where you should assess. Now, assessing this knowledge and skills within ZPD will inform the teacher whether your students have already achieved understanding or mastery of the concepts and skills after you have provided them the help they need. Okay, that's why they are at this stage, you are really scaffolding the students. Now, keep this in mind. Assessments designed for the ZAD or the zone of actual development will not promote development of your student and will not inform your teaching. Kasi alam na nila yon. So, kung lahat na lang ng tatanong nyo ay alam nila, syempre, check yan. So, it will not be the best way to inform how you will teach the succeeding lessons. Okay. Also, assessing concepts and skills that are too difficult or beyond their reach of your students will not be beneficial for you as teachers and for the students. So keep in mind that you have to develop assessment tasks at the ZAD. PD, the zone of proximal development. All right. The third essential question for this session is, why is it beneficial to create tasks and write assessment items for different levels of student competence? Okay, so eto na. Ano yung isusulat na assessment tasks and items for different levels of student competence? Whether they are at level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or more. Okay, I'll give you an example progression for grade 2 math. Again, this is just what I presented earlier, but then this is more, I will give you examples of assessment tasks related to each level. This slide is just recalling what I have presented to you earlier in the staircase with different students. Of course, in general, more students are in level 1, a little bit less in level 2, a few in level 3, and very few in level 4. I mean, that's the usual distribution. Now, it's the same competency for addition without your grouping for grade 2 math. Now, here's an example of an assessment task. At the lowest level, level 1, the learner should recognize the value and place value of each digit in a 3-digit number, hundreds, tens, and ones. Now, when do you do this? The timing is during the lesson. So the assessment task is given here. Sa klase ni na Sam ay merong 13 na mga babae at 15 na mga lalaking mag-aaral. Ilan lahat ang mga mag-aaral sa klase? Oh. You cannot just proceed with the algorithms of just adding the numbers. First is, tanungin, ano ang itinatanong ng word problem? Okay? You have to develop your students to understand word problems. Ano ang operation na gagamitin? Mag-a-add ba or magsusubtract? Anong mga bilang ang ating idaragdag sa isa't isa? You see how stepwise the questions are? Letter D. Sa aling place value tayo magsisimulang magdagdag? So, dapat alam nila na kung ano yung place values, ones, tens, hundreds. And letter E, pagkatapos maidagdag ang mga digits sa ones, aling mga digit naman ang ating idaragdag? You see how stepwise the procedure is. Now, what strategies can you use? You can use pictures, manipulatives. You can use, these are comprehension questions. Examples of comprehension, and you can let them have group sharing. They can learn with each other so that there may be a more capable classmate that can help the less capable one. All right, going to level 2, understands the properties of addition and applies each in appropriate and relevant situations. Again, when is this done? During the lesson. Example of a task. Ano kaya ang mangyayari kung pagpapalitin natin ng pwesto ang 13 at 15? Pareho o magbabago kaya ang sum na ating makukuha? So, the students need to do this. Now, maganda nga group sharing, no? Uusap yung mga estudyante sa isang maliit na grupo. They can also use pictures or manipulatives kung meron. Letter B, ano naman kaya? So, letter A is more on the commutative property. Letter B, ano naman kaya ang mangyayari kapag nagdagdag tayo ng 0 sa isang bilang? So, that's the identity property. So, masasagutan nila yan dapat if they are proficiency level 2. Now, level 3, ngayon, adds mentally 1-digit numbers to 2 digit numbers with sums up to 50. Again, this is done during the lesson. So bilang isang klase, subukan nating kumpletuhin ang iba pang mga addition equation. So pwede kayo magbigay ng maraming halimbawa. These are some examples. Okay, 64 plus 5. Marami pa kayong pwedeng idagdag dyan. Okay. And then level 4 adds numbers with sums through 1,000 without regrouping. So after the lesson naman ito, magbibigay kayo ng assessment task. Halimbawa, 542 plus 79 equals blank. So, pwede, marami kayong bibigay na ganyan. So, they have guided practice as individuals or they can do group work. Now, makikita nyo dito kung sino sa mga estudyante yung hindi pa niya kayang gawin itong nasa level 4. Tapos itong pangalawang example, tama ba ang addition equation na to? 104 plus 235. So, yung mga sagot nila rin, magsasabi sa teacher kung ito ba, kung narito na ba yung estudyante sa level na ito. Alright? So, in this assessment task, through these examples, give you an idea on how you can determine the ZPD. Because in the practice, as a teacher, if you guide some groups of students and they are able to accomplish the task, then they are at their ZPD. Pero pag hindi pa rin nila kaya, sa dami na examples binigay nyo, they are still beyond the ZPD. Okay? Now, this one is for English. Ito maganda kasi 5 naman ang levels. You know, the levels can vary depending on the learning competency. Okay? So, responding to a text. There are 5 levels. We have already tackled this earlier. I just gave you different diagram from levels 1 to levels 1 to 5. All right. Now, here are some sample tasks for the grade 2 English. Level 1 proficiency. The student should note important details of the story. So, binasa nila yung story tungkol kay Archibald by Eve Tarlet. Okay. Now, before the story, the teacher could ask the following. My sister was excited to see a pelican for the first time. So, papakita niya yung picture ng pelican. Then, which among the choices do you think is the meaning of pelican in a given sentence? My sister was excited to see a pelican for the first time. So it's more of, being familiar with the word and matching the right meaning. Then, another question, have you ever wondered what your neighbors think about you? How do you think will they describe you? Okay. Ano to, no? Motivation question. And it is good also to do it within groups of students. So this is beginning to let them note important details of the story. All right. Now, ito pa. Pumupunta na. During the story. So, ayan na, nabasa nila. During the story, binabasa nila yung story. How do his neighbors view Archibald? So, magdi-discuss. So, this teacher doesn't just allow the students to read on their own and go to the teacher's table and let the students do their work or their task. The teacher continues to scaffold. Now, after the story, nasa level 1 pa lang tayo, ha? Who is the main character of the story? How is he described by his neighbors? So, guided reading ito. Alright? 3-2 kasi. Now, at level 2, the student should verbalize this understanding of story events before, during, and after reading. So, before the story, the teacher can ask, what do the people in his neighborhood think about our main character? Anong tingin nila kay Archibald? So, magandang discussion point yan. Then, during the lesson or the story, since the neighbors think Archibald went too far with his jokes, what do you think did they do? So, mag-iisip sila. Ano kaya ang ginawa ng mga neighbors niya? Kasi, parang lumampas na si Archibald dun sa kanyang jokes. In other words, hindi na kaaya-aya yung ibang jokes ni Archibald. Okay. And then after the story, what did his neighbors think about Archibald after he made a series of pranks? What did they do about it? So here, level 2 pa rin ito, no? After reading, the teacher can employ an enrichment activity, which is good, like asking the students to make a breaking news about Archibald or a presentation of a chart. Okay, whatever is applicable to your type of class. Now, to develop or to find out who are at level 3 says that the learner can infer character traits and emotions. So, during the story, wala nang before the story, during the story na to, how do you think Archibald felt when he was asked to go back to their neighborhood? So, maganda na naman yung group sharing and discussion na maikli lang. Okay? Now, after the story, how do you think Archibald felt in each of these situations? So, you can have an enrichment activity as such strategy. If blank and then blank. And then you can ask some students to present the activity. Now, at level 4, they should already see the connection between personal experiences and experiences in the text or in the story. Now, before the story, pag level 4 yan, pwede niyong itanong, have you ever wondered what your neighbors think about you? How do you think will they describe you? Okay? What do the people in his neighborhood think about our main character in the story? So, merong application sa buhay ng estudyante at dun sa main character. Now, after the story, what could be asked? What similarities and differences does your neighborhood have with Archibald's neighborhood? Okay, so mag-iisip sila ng application sa kanilang neighborhood. And each of us is special just like Archibald. What traits do you possess that make you special? So this one can be done through an enrichment activity. Now, at level 5, the student should be able to apply ideas taken from literature and apply it to one's own life experiences. So after the story, syempre ito. Kasi mag-a-apply na. If you were Archibald's neighbor, what would you have done to show him you were sorry? Okay, magandang pag-usapan yan within a small group and then share in class. Then the next task, remove the paper from your box and read what is written on it. How do you think can you use these traits to help others in your neighborhood? So, meron ng nasa likod na papel nakalagay yung character traits. All right? So, with those examples and examples from the handouts that we will give to you soon, I'd like to share with you some key takeaways for this session. First is the description of progression of learning, which is a sequence of topics and competencies. It shows how a particular topic should develop from the simplest or most fundamental concept to the most complex. So galing ito sa curriculum guide, and you should look at the grade level before and even after, or the quarter after. That's why this is the basis also for our spiraling curriculum. Now, to the first essential question, how can a progression of learning help assessment design? The answer is designing assessment based on progression allows teachers to determine what their students know and can do. So you have in the examples I showed you, there were different assessment tasks on the different proficiency levels. So you will know where the students are. Next essential question, why is it important to consider ZPD when we assess learning? Because the teacher can find out what concepts and skills a student needs help with by determining his CPD. Okay. You will know where they need help if you know where their CPD is. If they need assistance for a certain task or skill or concept, then they are at their CPD. If they easily know it, they are at the zone of actual development. If it is beyond, it's beyond the CPD, then it's difficult. Let them first go to CPD. Now, third essential question, why is it beneficial to create tasks and write assessment items for different levels of student competence? So that the teacher caters to varying levels of knowledge and ability. And that will help you ensure that all types of learners are learning. Okay, so that ends my synchronous presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am Marlene, for the informative presentation and reiterating how important it is to be mindful of the data that we collect from our students. We hope that this presentation has clarified your concerns, participants, and motivated you to develop your assessment practice further. Now, I believe Dr. Farida is ready to answer your questions. We will begin with the questions raised in the forms that you submitted. But if you have any more questions to ask, you may type them in the YouTube comments box. This is the perfect time for you to ask questions, so please do not hesitate. And we would also like to call on our senior research fellow, Dr. Kevin Carl Santos, to join this part of the session. Laline, would you like to read the first question?
Sure, Xerxes. So, Ma'am Marlene and Kevin, we have here two related questions. So I'll just be reading them at once. The questions are, how do I identify the student's zone of proximal development? And how can we apply this concept effectively when doing assessment?
Okay. Would like to answer first? Kevin?
Sige, ma'am.
And then
I,
I
I'll answer the first one. So I think during the presentation of Ma'am Marlene, it was emphasized the learning progression, no, yung importance of learning progression. And yung learning progression, yun yung parang magiging medium nyo, no, in identifying the student zone of proximal development. Kasi the idea is you will have assessment task for each level, and then doon yung malalaman if this particular, based on this assessment task, kaya na bang gawin ito ng student, or kayang gawin ito ng student with the help of more abled individuals like you as teachers or pwedeng peers then. So to answer that question, how you can identify student zone of proximal development, first you have to construct or to have a learning progression for, let's say, for a particular topic, and then design assessment task for each level on the learning progression, and then that's how you'll be able to identify yung kaya niyang gawin with the help of or with the scaffolding, no, from coming from more abled individuals, and that's already the zone of proximal development.
All right, so well explained. The second question, how can we effectively apply in our assessment the zone of proximal development? As has been explained to you, no, I think what I can focus on now, excuse me, is effectively apply. To effectively apply, you have to have several assessment tasks falling under level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, depending on your progression of learning. So thereby, you will be able to detect where the students need help, your help, in any of the tasks that you do. Because some students may be only at level 2 and that's already their ZPD. Some, they are at level 4 and that's their CPD. So what is essential is for you to be able to help those who need help. And if you are successful in the help, then you are already assisting them in their CPD. All right. I think that completes the answers to two parts of question 1.
All right, thank you. I'll read question number 2. As a teacher, what should I do if the CPD of my students is at level 1? Again, as a teacher, what should I do if the zone of proximal development of my students is at level 1? So the lowest level.
All right. I assume that this teacher is talking about the whole class. And if the whole class is at level 1, then what you can do will be to give assessment tasks that will help them engage or tackle the description of level 1. And then after giving them several assessment tasks, then you can know if they are able to go to level 2. Now, you can also write assessment tasks and questions which are on level 2 and try to determine if given assistance, they are able to tackle those already. Then at that stage, you are already successful in bringing them up to the next level. Kevin, would you like to add some more
Um,
explanation?
Not anymore. But I think one of the things that was mentioned when learning progression was being discussed is yung acquiring the prerequisite skills. So that's also one thing that you should be emphasized here. And then since you mentioned that your students is a level 1 and that is the ZPD, then you as a teacher, you or even the peers who are more able, probably you have to think of ways on how to assist them so that they will be able to do the task, or that they will be able to acquire that skill at in level 1 without assistance later on, so that after that then they will proceed to the next level or level 2. So
Okay.
that, yep.
Yeah. Thank you. I have an example here. Naisip ko lang. Kasi kung lahat ng estudyante mo ay nasa level 1, ano? What you can do also, of course, after doing or giving formative assessment, you can observe what they can do independently, di ba? And talking about prior or prerequisite knowledge and skills, halimbawa lang, in a science class, you can connect the prior knowledge of a task in everyday context with a new task, or the concept that is being learned. For example, yung water cycle. If you have already described to them earlier in previous lessons evaporation, then you can use this to introduce condensation. And so when they make connections, they will be able to slowly understand the water cycle. So it's important, as sabi nga ni Kevin, it's important to identify the prerequisite skills that they already know. So they identify those and build on it in your lesson. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Ma'am Marlene and Kevin. So our third question has something to do with summative assessment. So teaching a heterogeneous class can be very challenging because students are in different zones of development. If I create a summative assessment, how many items should I allot for those in the lower levels, and how many items for those in the higher levels?
I think this question was also tackled last week. We said that there is no predetermined number of summative assessment items because there are many factors to consider. It's you, the teacher, who fully knows the characteristic of your class. And so, if you know that more of your students are at the lower levels, then you have to, you have to give items that are close to their level first. Now, if this is summative, then you have to know whether they have already, leapt to the higher level or they are approaching the higher level. Now, I think I mentioned that time is very important. The time available for the assessment, because not all of them can read the questions at the same rate. Also, the processing time of your students. Those in the lower levels are expected to process the questions more slowly. And then, if you are at the upper elementary level, if you're teaching at the upper elementary level or at the high school level, when you prepare a summative test items, from our experience, we usually time ourselves in answering the task. And you can multiply that by a factor of minutes. If I can do it in 3 minutes or 2 minutes, you can multiply it by 3 or 4, depending on the kind of students that you have. Okay? Rarely can you find students who can answer it at the rate that you can answer your questions. Okay, so that's my answer to that. Kevin, would you like to add?
Siguro I would just like to add because that question is about summative assessment, and typically di ba po when we have summative assessments, the goal is to evaluate yung learning outcomes at the end of, let's say, a chapter or a quarter. So typically ang goal natin if we're teaching a heterogeneous class is matulungan natin yung students going to that goal, which is yung mga learning outcomes na dapat nilang matutunan. So yung goal natin is if you know that you have students na there are from the nasa lower levels at nasa higher level. So as a teacher, parang you have to develop or probably task that will help them achieve para papunta doon. So kaya sabi natin that the formative assessment is very important kasi kasama siya sa teaching and learning, and yung summative assessment towards the end is to evaluate to assess kung na-meet niya ba. So as a teacher, kung heterogeneous siya, you have to develop assessment tasks or methods that will help them reach that goal. So I guess I think that is more important so that they will achieve what is intended na ma-achieve nila at the end of a particular term or a quarter.
All right, thank you. Let me read the fourth question. In creating assessment items, for example, summative test, while considering the progression of learning, is it necessary that items must be in order from easy to difficult, or can it be in any order as long as the items have varying difficulty? Again, in creating assessment items, for example, summative test, while considering the progression of learning, is it necessary that items must be in order from easy to difficult, or can it be in any order as long as the items have varying difficulty?
Kevin, would you like to go first?
Okay. Typically po, no, I guess yung answer ko is in the typical situation, if we have a progression of learning of for a particular topic, from level 1 to level 2 to level 3 and so on, typically nagiging more complex yung task or nagiging more complex yung skills, no, or competencies na kailangan nilang matutunan. And if you will create items measuring, let's say, those skills na of varying complexity, typically they are associated with varying difficulty as well. So, in a typical test development process, kapag mag-arrange tayo ng items, the usual way of arranging items is based on the level of difficulty. So, parang easier items come first, tapos pupunta doon sa mas mahirap na items. And if associated yung level ng difficulty doon sa complexity nung task or ng competency sa learning progression. So we expect na parang yung itsura ng magiging items or exam natin, the first few items will cover the lower levels tapos papunta sa higher level doon sa learning progression na yun. Ayun po.
Okay, yeah, I agree. And that also gives more chances for students who are a bit slower, even though they would know how to tackle the assessment task. Meron talagang mabagal sumagot. So if the lower levels go first, then they will be able to, to cover and finish the less complex ones ahead of the more complex ones, which will require more time.
All right, so we are now in our last question from our YouTube viewer. So ang context po ay yung hindi po natatapos lahat ng competencies sa quarter because of any untoward school activities. Now, in that case, how can we help to assess their or the students' learning performance to the next?
Okay, Kevin, would you like to go?
I'll try to answer if I understand the context po. Well, I think if this is the case, though, parang similar questions were already asked in the previous run of this assessment PD of accuracy. Ito yung isa sa sinasabi ng mga teachers na hindi natatapos, and we emphasize on yung isa sa sagot namin nila Ma'am Marlene and Teacher Therese doon ay focusing on big ideas. So or in other words, parang kumbaga ano yung mga pinaka-importante na dapat matutunan ng students. So I guess kung mag-a-assess kayo, no, parang kung hindi niyo matatapos siya for a particular quarter, then you should focus on on assessing the more important or most important ones para mas inform kayo, no, as teachers papunta sa next quarter, ano yung kumbaga parang ano yung na-master na ng mga students na skills at ano yung hindi pa nila na ma-masters. Maybe that probably would help.
Yes, I agree. It will help if you, with other teachers teaching the same grade level, can meet and look at your budget of work in terms of the most essential and most important prerequisite concepts and skills that are needed for the succeeding quarters. Okay? So that, yun sabi nga, when you do the assessment for these skills, prerequisites, and to the next quarters, you will be able to know where to begin in the succeeding quarter. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for your students to catch up. Kung magmamadali kayong tapusin yung coverage, pero hindi naman nila, wala pa sila sa CPD, hindi rin nila maiintindihan yung mga susunod. And it will go on and on until they go to the next grade level. Okay? So look at the, what do you call that, CG or curriculum guide as a whole. Within a quarter and even in the next quarter. Kasi pag may interruptions, pwede nyo pa rin makover yung most important and those concepts which are prerequisites to the next ones. Okay?
Thank you, Ma'am Marlene and Kevin, for answering the questions. And of course, to you, dear teachers, for participating and raising your concerns. So we are done now with evidence collection. You might have some questions or thoughts in mind, what to do next. How do we use or interpret those data that we have collected? So those topics will be tackled by the next session. So we hope that you're looking forward to taking them. Now, we would like to request our resource speakers, both Dr. Ferido and Dr. Santos, to provide their final message for this synchronous session.
Okay. I hope that session 3, evidence collection, gave you an overview of what to do with your students in terms of developing a progression of learning, and also in helping you identify the zone of proximal development where assessment should focus on. Okay, and slowly you can build up progressions of learning for chunks of topics in the curriculum, in your learning area, together with other teachers. You do not need to do it alone. You can even do this during your LAC sessions. And so at the end of the school year, you have a compilation of progressions of learning that can be used for the next school year. Okay. So I hope that this will not be a burden, but slowly and gradually, you can start building up these progressions of learning and also assessment tasks that accompany them. Okay, thank you.
Okay. I would just like to emphasize probably for this session the importance of developing learning progressions. And as Ma'am Marlene said, it is a tedious task, but you don't have to do it yourself. You can ask your colleagues in school to help you build or develop learning progressions for different topics in your learning area, because it really takes time to build one. But as mentioned in this session, it is very important to develop that, because that will help us or enable us to determine the zone of proximal development of the students. And if we can determine the ZPD of the students, then we can, as a teacher, we can be able to help them or become more helpful to them in going to more complex levels in the across the learning progression. That's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Ferido and Dr. Santos. Now, I think it's a good time to address some administrative issues from our participants. We've been monitoring the Facebook group and your reflection logs to find out any concerns that you may be having right now, especially on the use of the learning platform Qualtrics. Ideally, we recommend using personal computers so you can view the lecture videos and complete the activities more efficiently. A good internet connection is also required, but you can still use your tablet device or mobile phone. Just make sure to have a stable internet connection. Again, most of the technical issues are device or internet connection related. If you need any help, please send a message to our Facebook group. Any announcements regarding our ongoing training will all be posted there, so we highly advise that you join and visit it regularly.
Before we close, here are some reminders for our next sessions. Session 4, Interpretation and Use of Student Data During Classroom Discussion, will be available starting Tuesday, July 12. Synchronous Session 4 will be held on Friday, July 15 at 3 p.m. via YouTube Live. For those who have not answered or completed sessions 1, 2, and 3, you may still proceed with the training. But note that we highly encourage you to take the sessions in order that is from session 1 first, going to session 2 next, up to session 6 to maximize your possibilities for learning. So as you can see in the table, asynchronous session 1 will be closed on July 12, session 2 will be closed on July 19, and asynchronous session 3 will be closed on July 26. For updates and for any concerns, you may visit and reach us through the official Facebook community page, ACT RC Assessment Professional Development. Xerxes?
Sorry, Lynn. So this ends the third synchronous session of our Assessment Professional Development Program. We hope that this has strengthened your learning and inspired you to look forward to the next synchronous and asynchronous sessions. See you next time. Maraming
Maraming salamat
salamat
po.
po.